We're back around. This time, another wonderful deep dive look at some of the things that we're doing here over at The Approach. Big shouts to the chat. Big shouts to Clint Moody. Clint, you are here with me now. Big shouts, Clint. What's
up?
good, dude?
What's up, everybody? What's
How's
up, everybody?
So today, Clint, can you let us know a little bit about what you're going to be talking to us about and what you're going to be showing us for today?
Tonight we have a house song called Autumn Leaves by Londen Summers. This is a sort of a soulful, deep house vibe that comes out of Denver, Colorado. So shout outs to Londen Summers and Denver, Colorado and Mind Warp and everybody out there. This track, I learned a lot from mixing this track, and I'm excited to share some of those insights with everybody because I'd never really mixed a house track, especially one like this before. And the kind of things that I learned from this, I think, will be pretty applicable to everybody at any experience level, be it a house, whether house music's your thing or not. I think that there are some lessons in this that translate pretty well. So,
definitely,
I'm
definitely
excited to share it. I guess let's just get right into it.
Sweet.
Let's just do this. Boom.
Sweet.
All right. So here we are in Les Ableton, and we have this track. Approximately 70 channels, thereabouts. And we had to work from stems on this one. This one was a stem track. And let's see what we've got as just a general overview. Let's close all these groups. We've got drums, effects, some sub stuff. We got some melodic bits, a lot of kind of pads, some funky kind of sax going on at some points, some sort of wah effect pedal stuff. And we have some soulful vocals. And these are... this actually came from the source content for the vocals was not something that somebody recorded. It was simply it was a sample. It was a splice sample. And so, we were limited as far as what we could do with that. And This is a good lesson in kind of like how to go about, how somebody might be able to go about mixing something that's kind of pre-baked to a degree. And some other things that were interesting about this session that I feel the need to point out is that when we got this, obviously we have to drag in the stems. It's the first thing we have to do is kind of get an overhead, 5,000-foot overview awareness of what all content is here. Because if you don't know what's there, you can't mix it. That's kind of a big thing we always say. If you don't know what's there, you can't mix it. So in that process, I learned that a lot of these stems were missing. There wasn't any audio content actually printed into the stems. And this,
you mean so they were like muted?
Point. Oh, completely silent. Yeah, just completely like there's nothing on them at all. And This is even after turning them up 24 dB. There's no content. And this is a common thing that can happen, specifically if you're in Ableton. I don't know that this happens with other DAWs, although I'm sure it probably could, where if you go to render stems from your session, there is a right and wrong way to render stems. And Ableton, by default, doesn't necessarily do it in a quote-unquote wrong way. I said wrong, but it's not wrong. It's just, it doesn't do you any favors as far as the audio engineering side of things goes. When you, what I'm talking about is when you go to export audio, you get, this dialogue here, and you see at the top we have rendered track. This is what is actually going to be exported. You have the ability to select any number of tracks, but at the top you also have the ability to select all individual tracks for export. And Ableton will go through and print every single track in your session as a separate audio file. The problem with that is that Ableton doesn't, for whatever reason, it doesn't print the audio through the groups or through the kind of signal flow that currently exists in your session. This is a big deal. It's a pretty significant issue if you are trying to get things sounding like they do in your session in the stems. And what I mean by that, for example, here, if I wanted to bounce out this funky synth pluck, and all of its processing that it's got on there, we see we've got several processors on here. And if I were to do and also on the group, we have processing. Also on the master, we have processing. And if I were to use Ableton's inbuilt sort of export all individual tracks function, what happens is on the back side of Ableton, it just prints this track and all subsequent tracks just straight out. It's like it doesn't even go through the group. and
Yeah,
it
it
does still
doesn't.
go through the master. So it's kind of
No, it
like this
doesn't go through master
roundabout
either.
way.
It skips
Does it
master as
not?
well.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We've
Yeah.
done the
Okay.
test. I
So
even got
I remember
into an
that now.
argument just the other day, literally with the guy that we're looking to do the machine learning with to be able to automate this process. And he's like, "What do you mean it doesn't come out of the groups or the master bus?" And I was like, "No, it's like the three separate parallel processes to the audio flow, which is like all channels running in parallel to all groups running in parallel to master bus." And so that's basically
Yeah.
where Ableton is splitting it off. It's pulling it from either in all bounce all individual tracks. It's pulling from the individual tracks themselves. It's then also taking from the group, and it's taking from the master bus. Since all of those are parallel streams of audio, it's able to do that simultaneously and not in batch. And that's the difference. That's what
Yeah.
we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. So whenever we print out this, the melodics group here itself, it'll print out an individual track for every single one of these tracks, but then it'll also print out a group track of just the melodics group. And that is not how it's supposed to be done. I've learned this from working with Seth, and we should probably do a whole thing on just how to properly bounce stems because
Definitely.
out of all of my education, out of all of my audio learning on my own, and in school, I mean, you can see it right there. I've got a degree in audio. In all of my education, that had never been covered. How to properly print stems through the buses, what order of operations to kind of go through with that. And why that's important is because of reasons like this, where if you trust Ableton to do it for you, you will find that certain things either don't get printed or extra stems get printed, such as the case here. So pro tip for anybody with Ableton, when you're printing stems, if you just use the, all individual tracks option, it will not print appropriately. And you will not have stems that sound even partially like your session to some degree. So keep that in mind. Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat right now, Adam says that, this problem has caused you so much frustration. Yes, it definitely is very frustrating. And it's quite time consuming to do it properly, as I've learned. And so thank you, Seth, for explaining to me how to properly do that. We need to make that a whole thing.
Yeah,
on
let's
how to
definitely
properly do it.
let's definitely do that.
But long and short of it is for people now. The long and short of it is that you literally have to click solo on every single track and print them one at a time through the groups, and in a specific order. If you have returns, there's like a logic matrix to the thing, but essentially you literally have to hit solo and then render everything individually, letting it run through the groups and then through the master, and then just print it out that way.
Yeah,
and
batch.
that's the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about, was that there is blank content that I got handed, and so when we drag these in, it was up to me to kind of determine, okay, is this content stuff that I need? Is there anything missing from what I do have that is currently present in the quote unquote client print, the print that we request when we get a session handed to us, to kind of indicate, okay, hey, this is what the client, Clint, the client, this is what my session sounds like. Here you go, mix engineer. This is what it's supposed to sound like when you get it. That's what this print actually is. So without that print, we don't have any idea of what the stems that we are handed are supposed to sound like, or what the Ableton session is supposed to sound like, or whatever. So step 0, check the content. And step 1, I guess, is going to be reference it and make sure that there is everything that you have is exactly what you need in order to make up the print that you are given, so that at the very minimum, like Seth has said before, you're starting from the same place that the artist is at. You're not starting at a kind of, a lesser place than where they're currently at. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to address here. So I just put those in a big, once I indicated or kind of identified where those were blank, again, by just clicking on them, boosting them all 24 dB, just to see that, yes, they are all completely silent. I just put them in a group below everything called blank. And it's just to keep them in the session so that if I need to communicate with the artist or something, I have the stem name there that I can easily be like, okay, hey, artist, this stem, this stem, and this stem are blank. Are they required? Are they active in your session? They're blank on my end. So good thing to have them in there, but they're just down at the bottom. So yeah, let's move on to just listening to what we got sent, and we'll go from there. So currently these are routed to external outputs. I'm going to switch that to master, and I'll just turn off any kind of master processing I've got going on here. Let's do that. Just group everything up here. Cool. So this should be what we got sent. So this is Autumn Leaves as it came to us by Londen Summers. And I'll get us a couple of visuals here. This is exciting. We actually have the ability to pull up an insight and it not cripple the computer now because new technology. Yay, new technologies. So let's do this right here, and that way we can see kind of how loud the track is. And let me minimize that just a little bit. Ableton's freaking out. Seth, does that ever happen to you? Because that happens to me almost every time I open Insight these days. I don't know if it's my mouse or if it's something else, but it always
happens to me with
out.
when screen resolutions are maybe a little bit weird. I just leave it where it is.
Okay.
Just run it
That's
back.
probably
Yeah,
what it is.
just send it.
Yeah, I just
Send
had to
it.
import a new one. So here we go. So here is the track as it came. Vocals really far in the back there. Crash is super forward. That hi-hat's really cracking. Little washout section. Soulful vocals kind of in the background there. Guitar. Cool. I think I'm going to stop it there just to keep things rolling. But that's basically the sound of the track as it is.
Hey, Clint,
Now,
we're
like,
getting
super- yeah.
getting a little bit of pops in there, a little bit of dropouts. It sounds like. Is the setting 16 and half a second
Yes, it
on
is.
the listen to? Okay. Can you maybe
Yep.
bump the latency up a little bit on that?
Yeah. Now let's go ahead and bump that up to, what do you think, a 3/4 or a full second?
Just go 3/4. Yeah.
3/4. There we go.
Sweet. Thanks.
I'll play back some audio so we can test it. Let's do that now. Here,
Sure.
let me know how it is.
Go for it. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So that's the track as it. Yeah, no problem. That's we need fidelity. Cannot have pops and clicks. People talking in the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and shoot them up. All right. So here's the track after some mixing and mastering has happened on it. I'll just play it from the build up here. That hi-hat's really been tamed. Vocals are way more forward now. Flip back over to the original. Oh yeah, massive shift in frame there. And so you can hear right away, and just for context, what I'm doing here when I click on this rack and how this is able to let us hear the client print. That's what was just happening. I just have a gate on here. And the reason I'm having to do it this way is because we have master bus processing. And because we're having to route through listen to way down here at the end, it's easier to just use a gate with the sidechain listening to the client print with the little sidechain monitor button turned on, and allows us to quickly monitor other tracks. It's basically anything that has a sidechain input with a monitor device is a quote-unquote insert signal anywhere-izer. So that's kind of what I use it for here. I often make what I've called reference racks just for this purpose. Sometimes in mastering and mixing, when you have a big session filled with content and plugins, it will, when you use the solo buttons, there's like a slight crossfade that happens when you hit the solo buttons, and it just causes a little bit of level spike or a pop or something like that. It's just a little bit of a glitch right before the audio actually switches over or as it's switching over to the soloed track. But when you do it this way, for whatever reason, Ableton handles it a lot better, and it will allow you to just turn this on and have no pops or clicks, and it immediately just switches the audio. So when I turn this on, we're able to hear and I'll go ahead and label this for us. Client print.
As you mentioned a second ago, that this could be done with a compressor or with anything with a sidechain solo.
Compressor,
right?
sidechain, yeah, exactly. Compressor, anything with a sidechain. I use the gate because I feel like it just might have a little less processing going on in the back end, but that's just my plain assumption. I have no information to back that up whatsoever.
Clint favors the gate.
I favor the gate. You can use whatever you like, compressor, multiband, whatever, your flavor. But I use the gate, and when I do that, just to make sure that I never am accidentally gating anything, if I accidentally turn this off, just set the threshold all the way up and the floor all the way up. You don't even have to mess with the threshold if you just turn the floor all the way up. Even if I turn this off, it's never going to be gating anything. So yeah, that's the purpose behind this. And so you can hear immediately, if you were paying attention there when I was flipping that on and off and switching between them, there's massive shifts in the frame, but in a way that is positive overall, I think. And the client was stoked on it, and Seth liked it, and so it was. And it's also a lot closer, most importantly, to the reference that we were provided by the client. So what is that reference? Well, let's play that. So I have here another one of these racks, or these gates, and I'm just going to call it Ref, because the reference here is this John Summit Make Me Feel track. And this is a really cool track. It's a really popular deep house track, or I'm not sure if it's deep house. I'm not too hip to the various house subgenres.
Oh, but the house people, they're going to be so mad now. They're like, no, that's...
Oh, they're going to... I'm sorry.
That's deep minimal twitch. What are you talking about?
Deep minimal acid funk? Like, what do you do? What are you talking about? So, yeah, sorry, house people. Oh, wait, yep, we got somebody. Yep, Tech House. There you go.
There it is.
There you go. Thomas Xavier, he would know.
Somebody needs to know. Sure. Yeah, totally.
So yeah, it's Tech House. So Tech House, it's a lovely Tech House tune by John Summit called "Make Me Feel."
Yeah,
this is what that track actually sounds like. Sounds like this. And if I flip back over to the original print. There's some immediate differences that kind of launch out at my face, okay? And those are the things that we need to kind of kind of rein in this track, and this is kind of our targeting. This is what gives us direction. So, and like Thomas Xavier is in the chat saying, it isn't a loud track in particular, though. In my opinion, for house, it's like negative 7.5 LUFS. Yeah, exactly. That's the cool thing about the tech house world. It seems like they're not loud tracks, which makes them perform really well on Spotify as well as in live scenarios. There's a lot of room for dynamics. Things flex. So, yeah, I think that's actually a really great example of a good tech house tune with that's mixed well. It's clean. It's got plenty of low end, and it just works. Also, everything is nice and soft in the reference. We play that back. If you listen to things like the hi-hat, the transients, the kind
clap
of micro
as
detail
well.
in the transients. Yeah. Clap as well. They're very soft. They're very rounded. So like very soft. And then in the print that we have to start from, the clap is a very different style of clap. First of all, it's like a big room kind of clap, and the hi-hat's very, very metallic, very sizzly, very bright. That classic kind of, I don't know if that's 909 open hi-hat or something, but it's a classic open hi-hat sound, and that is the immediate things that are jumping out to me are kind of transient response, framing of the low mids in the sideband, especially. You listen to the John Summit track, and there's this kind of pluck arp, like dun dun dun, and it's 10 miles wide in the sideband. But in the print that we have to start from, there's not a whole lot that's really wide. I mean, if we listen to the Ghost Zone,
nothing.
Yeah, practically nothing. And then here's John Summit. Start over. A lot of nice low mids. And things just fall off a cliff around 200 hertz. 250, 300 basically. But even in the sideband, it's smooth. And that is worth that is remarkable. That is worthy of making a remark about. That is noticeable. So that's what we had to start with. So does anybody have any questions so far about kind of why we're referencing in this way, or just the track in general? Anything that you want to see in particular? If so, let me know in the chat.
Yeah, I want to know
those comments.
I want to know what stuck out to you. Like, what were the major, beyond just the softness? Like, what were the elements that you, between the two, that you're noticing as being like definitive to keeping you from reaching that target?
Yeah, one of the first things was the vocals. Like, if you have vocals in a song, generally they need to be able to be heard pretty well. They need to be intelligible, I think. And that's what you notice immediately about, at least I noticed immediately about the reference, was that, okay, the vocals almost immediately, like, oh, if I get out of the Ghost Zone, I can hear them. They're not the most upfront, but they're legible. And then in the print we have, the vocals are a little back, they're just a little bit. I notice also the hi-hat is just cracking in the track, and
they
the
seemed
low end is a little forward.
Yeah, and they seemed like they weren't, like they kind of came and went as well. Like they didn't have that same consistency as the other track.
Yeah, they definitely didn't. And if we look at the audio for that, is up here to the top. Here is the main hi-hat. They're all pretty static, but for some reason they just don't. You can even see the kind of waveform is just a little bit of undulation in the peaks there. But for whatever reason, they just don't have that. Well, for obviously the softness, but they're also incredibly loud. So those are some of the things that stuck out immediately. Also, the general ambience and kind of width of the track, the overall cohesion was something that launched out at me. And all of those things are going to need to be handled, in due time. So the other thing, I guess, was the sax. When I listened to the original Autumn Leaves, one of the first things I heard was this saxophone. Let's see, I believe it's here. Oh, like that. Those effect sounds are just piercing. I don't know if they are for anybody else. Maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, they cut pretty hard. Yeah.
They do, and they're just very, very loud. So I'll skip ahead a little bit here. Soulful vocal. Oh, another thing that I had remembered that I thought about here was just ambience. Ambience wise, certain things are just incredibly dry, and they stick out because of that. And it's not to say that everything needs to be drenched. It's just that, there's not a cohesive ambience amongst everything. And you really hear that on just certain little stick out sounds, like certain things. I think there's like these wah pedals right here. Or I don't know what they exactly are. I think they're just like it's this sound. Oh, well. Not that one. Yeah, it is that one. That one, the keys and things like that, there are certain little elements that sort of, I believe it might be this one. Yeah, that. Bone dry. When we first got it was bone dry, and we had to kind of add some ambience to that to kind of get the cohesion to be there. Like that. Like you listen to that section right there.
Yeah.
Right, and it's like it feels almost separate to the entirety of the rest of the track, which is very monocentric, very right up the middle. Like you can see it, just very mono. And then that one sound comes in, and it's just way over to the left. If we hit the ghost zone, we can hear it really, really clearly. Yeah, see, so those were some of the things that jumped out immediately. Let me go over here, check the chat real quick, see if anybody's got any questions. Kurto, I'm curious about what you did to kind of shift the frame in the way that you did. Yeah, so that's a good question, and that's really important. That was the kind of the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, was getting this to sound or be framed similarly to the John Summit track. And how do we go about that process? Well, first and foremost, my approach here was just to go for the drums and to try to get those adjusted in the ways that I felt like they might need to be adjusted. And I'll leave the mastering on for this. Let's take a listen to the drums. I don't have the ability to easily show you how they sounded before, but here is the main kick kind of before. Oh, I think I'm in the ghost zone still. Yep. Right? Pretty standard kick. I mean, there is a little bit of kind of a roominess to it, a boxiness. But in the final version, we kind of tucked that in a little bit. And we actually even, I believe we took there's a separate track entirely for the click. Now, I don't know if this was intentional or not on behalf of the producer, but when the stems were sent over, for whatever reason, this was actually much more beneficial than just using the full kick stem in and of itself, because obviously we have more control. And so that's typically where I was starting, was getting the drums kind of framed up correctly, because along with the bass, to get that to work. And I definitely had to have Seth's help on some of this, because again, having never mixed house before, I mean, I've mixed house a little, but not nearly as much as other genres. But also, the differences that was something I found challenging was the stylistic differences in the production itself relative to the reference that we were provided. And that kind of threw me off a little bit. Like, we have a big room clap, right? Big popping, big reverberant clap here, very synthetic sound. And in the reference itself, it's not the same. It's right, like very kind of tight and soft and smooth. And so that was something I found challenging personally, was to get that framed up. Now, how do I actually go about that process? A lot of it came down to, and Seth and I have talked about this quite a bit as well, where it's not often as much trying to figure out what you like about something. Sometimes it's figuring out what you don't like about something and trying to remove the things you don't like, or that are perhaps not the best move. And that can kind of lead you in the right direction. So that was sort of how this came together. In the kick itself, we had to start removing some of those boxy frequencies. This was the EQ that I actually first had, where I was actually emphasizing some of that and framing it really differently. And then I asked Seth about this, and he was like, no, we need to get rid of that. It's just the overall framing had to shift a little bit. And so really, it was just kind of getting this mix on the drums using the reference that I had as kind of a guideline, as a targeting, and just trying to get that along with the bass. Let me go ahead and minimize this effects group. Along with the sub, which, and this is something else that I had struggled with. If you look at the sub, which I'll play that on its own here. The sub already has ducking in it. It's baked in. It's already been printed with honestly, if I had to put money on it, I would say that this session had LFO tool on it. Just based off of the shape that this is making. It seems like a very LFO tool kind of pumping effect. And so we had to use that, and then also kind of frame this with the drums in a way that got us sounding much closer to the reference. Now, the reference itself had a lot more tamed low end compared to the original print. Here's the original print. Also, this is a quick tangent, but the benefit of using this as well is the fact that I can leave these other channels soloed. I can leave the drums and the bass, the sub soloed, and still be able to flip over to the print. It's my workaround for not having a monitor controller like Seth does, or other mix engineers might. So another kind of little side advantage there. So when we listen to the original here, and then we flip over to the reference, listen to the low end. In the track, there's a lot more low end, and it's a lot more, just a lot more forward. And the kick is hitting harder in the track we have compared to the reference. Overall, the low end is just not sitting like the reference. So some of those things, honestly, first and foremost, getting the levels right. Just get the levels better than they currently are is going to go a really long way. And that's what I spent a fair amount of time doing, is just getting the levels of the kick and the bass right. And you see it here in the kick. I've got some EQ as well as some processing here on this kick to kind of bring up the tackiness. And I want to go through this rack because this is a pretty interesting setup that is not immediately intuitive as to why it happened this way, but it wound up being the right move. And this is sometimes kind of like a hack that you might wind up doing. This is something I can imagine being pretty useful under certain circumstances. It won't work for everything, but it worked here. So in this, and by the way, I tangent a lot, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat. The chat's the place to be if you're watching this after the fact.
There is a question, but I'm waiting for you finish what you were saying, and then I'll bring in the question. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, well, basically, I can wait because this once I get going on this, it'll be a second.
Oh, okay. So Thomas Xavier is curious about when we're talking about getting levels. Thomas Xavier is asking whether or not mixing in red and turning off all the master bus processing tends to work for them. When getting delivered quiet assets, do you ever turn them up into the red with a utility?
Definitely. And that is sort of genre dependent. Like if we have a pop track, we're not going to do that because unless the pop track is that style. If it's like an edgy, super aggressive track, we might do that. But generally speaking, that's a genre specific thing. And in this case, I actually don't think we did that on this track. I feel like we brought the reference down to match the track.
Well, yeah,
because the current level of loudness.
The targeting was like -7, right, in LUFS.
Yeah, and the track we had was nowhere near that. I think it was like -12 or something of the sort. Actually, we can see. Yeah. We go here. Oh no, it was up there. It's actually too loud. That's what it was. Yeah, so this was actually too loud. And then if we go to the reference, I believe it was actually a little quieter by like a dB.5.
Yeah, smoother, so much nicer on the ears.
so much smoother. Yeah. And a lot of that is just like high in micro detail and like really good transient control, making things nice and smooth. But overall, like the track that we had was just too loud. And part of that framing normally will require turning assets up into the red and just seeing how hard you can push it. If it's a dubstep track, absolutely. Definitely one of those things that kind of opened my eyes. Thank you, Seth. Was just take the thing and slam it and see what you can do with it, because you never know, that might be the right move. Don't assume that won't work, because it might. And assumptions are not good. Gus, I see Gus is in the chat.
We missed you too, Gus.
Not a question. Oh my God, yeah, it's been a minute. What's up, Gus? So with regards to this track, as far as the leveling is concerned, a lot of it, like when I'm doing the mixing, and Seth has a monitor controller that he uses for this purpose, but I don't. And so what I'll do is I'll have these racks here on the master. I'll have them set up on hotkeys. So the client print almost always, it's not in this case. I've sort of standardized my workflow now, but usually the tilde key is going to be the client print, and that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever along the top row of the keyboard open for references. So 1 will be reference 1, 2 will be reference 2, and so on. And it becomes really easy to just kind of use those to flip over to the reference. And just doing this sort of really quick A-Bing between things is a really good way of making sure that your levels are in the right direction. And that's really a big help most of the time. Is just quick comparisons will take you a very long way. So in this regard, a lot of it came down to starting with the kick and I believe the sub, and just trying to get that feeling correct. But it's a little difficult because, timbrally, there's not a whole lot happening here. And one of the things that was important to get right, I think one of the first moves was to just like try to level the entire drum kit, just with rough levels. Just make big sweeping moves if need be, to just get the things reframed in a way that I felt like was more balanced toward the reference. And so here, one thing that I'd noticed was the original kick, the actual low stem here, this kick low, didn't really have a whole lot of like punch in it, and the provided quote unquote click stem also didn't really provide me with enough kind of punch after I'd gotten things framed up well. And so with that, that's where this rack comes in. So let me play you the kick as it was before I did anything, and let me turn off also all of this processing here on the group. Oop. So here's the kick, sort of before. I'll go ahead and turn this off too. So before. Right, and also what's interesting here, and this is something I'd not really seen before, is the click is actually playing a different rhythm than the kick itself. So that's an interesting little feature of this set of stems. And the click itself, like I said, wasn't really providing me with enough click on the kick. So I had to kind of add one, and that's kind of what this rack is about. So one of the first moves I did to try to fix that, try to get more cohesion out of these two stems, is just flip the polarity on the click and just see where that gets me. Before, it's, you can't really tell that anything's even different. And honestly, for the most part, it's not any different. But the benefit of having that there in the context of the rest of the track sometimes can help. So moving on to this rack here. This is interesting. Let me just turn this off and play it, and then I'll turn it on and play it, and you can just see what it does. So it removes that boxiness, but then it still somewhat gives us a little bit more top end, even though I'm not really adding top end per se, at least not immediately. Now, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of this is, and I don't remember if I had actually created this in isolation, like just listening like this, or if I actually had group processing on the kick as a whole. It's likely that I may have had the kick processing on as processing on the entire kick, both of these stems, and then began to adjust the low end element. I don't recall. But what I know this rack is doing is removing those boxy elements, lifting up on the kind of thump a little bit down here at about 71 hertz. And then this thing right here. This is a pretty cool thing that I don't know why I've done this in the past, or when I've learned this in the past, but it's a pretty cool little trick. Basically, what I'm doing is using an erosion on a parallel chain. This side's dry. This side has an erosion and a gate. And what I'm doing is eroding one half of the signal, so to speak, and gating that to add an artificial click into this layer. And so this is what this is actually adding. And I guess without the this other rack, this kind of convoluted rack here, that's what I'm adding. So without that, and then with it,
that's amazing.
I'm literally
that's a great one.
Yeah, I'm synthesizing a top for this by using erosion on the noise setting. You don't want to use sine, unless you're really going for a crazy timbre, like a bit reduced timbre. But using noise, depending on if it's, how wide you want the sound to be, or the wide the transient to be, you can use noise or wide noise. And I'm using noise to get some signal up to basically just erode that sound. Right? And then I'm using a gate to I'm having the gate respond to only high frequencies, and then having it chop off the signal really quickly. So,
and where are you routing that? Where is the gate being routed from? Where are you sourcing that gate signal from?
This is sourcing from this sound here. It's just the kick. It's just the source content of the channel. It's just routing back to...
external sidechain is not on that.
It's not on. No, I'm just using the EQ itself. So the gate is only reacting to high frequencies that are present in the sound coming out of this eroded version of the kick. And then, so with the gate on, so like if I turn the floor up, so I'm adding, basically just making a click and then kind of blending that in. And yeah, without it, that's how I got the click to get in there. And then another thing that kind of helped was this rack here. This is a high-low rack that I've made. That's it's a fancy gate setup where you have two gates that are opposing each other, and it's bit perfect if you set it up in exactly this way. If you join the approach, I'll give it to you. So this is a really, really overly powerful rack that a lot of people really don't know how beneficial this thing actually is, because of the fact that this is literally a free recreation, almost exactly a perfect recreation of Bose Digital Labs Transgressor 2 Transient Shaper. This is based off of a trick that I've seen old engineers do, like Andy Wallace, the legend Andy Wallace, do for Rage Against the Machine drums, where you can just isolate. Essentially, it's a fancy amplitude splitter. Things above a certain amplitude get broken off into one chain, things below a certain amplitude get broken off into another. And coincidentally, now there are entire EQs built with this concept in mind. I'm looking at you, Split EQ. This is a really powerful concept, and because of the fact that the gates that are being used to make this rack have side chaining, as you can see here, you can use the side chain filter settings to really, really specifically dial in what goes to each side, and that's where the real power of this thing is. You can really isolate, almost as accurately as you can with a sampler and like moving starting and end locators. You can really accurately dial in what goes to what side, and what you notice is I'm using this to isolate high amplitudes and low amplitudes, and I'm just turning up the low amplitudes a little bit. So, but without this, and with it, it's just a little bit more full. And another way of me showing that could be done in this way right here. I'm going to grab an oscilloscope plugin. Oscilloscopes are really handy tools. This one's a really good one if you're looking for one. It's called Oscillos Megascope. Definitely worth the investment. I don't recommend plugins like this often, but this one is really cool. So before, we've got our kick kind of locked in, right? And let me get this to make it look a little better. There you go. So we've got our kick, a lot kind of dialed in like this. If I add this rack, so there we go. Just kind of beefs it up just a little bit. And honestly, it might not even be necessary in this case. It was at the time, but this is a really good rack on in other occasions. In this case, I'm just using it to kind of beef up the low end a little. And so that's what is kind of making the timbre of the kick. Now, all of that is running through a bunch of processing on the actual group that contains the click and the kick itself. Excuse me. There's an EQ here kind of taking out some more of that low mid stuff. I kind of really had to reshape the low mids and the lows to kind of get the kick that was here to be progressing in frequency similar to the John Summit track. And it got a little nitpicky, but it ultimately wound up working. And I can see this is, Seth and I were just talking about this. This is actually when I had Adaptive Q as a preset back in the day. So whenever, months ago when I had that like that. So after we went, we just do a basic bit of EQing here, just lifting up the tops a little. I'm widening the kick. Widening the kick because width can often translate to front to back perception. Kind of a closeness factor. It's kind of subtle if you do it in certain ways. Like if you don't always hear things that are wide as being wide. Sometimes you spread things with like an Ozone 9 imager and they come forward in the mix a little bit. And that has to do with psychoacoustics. So that's a really interesting trick to kind of get things to feel more forward in the mix, but without actually being much more forward in the mix. So there's that. And then I carefully was analyzing the John Summit track in the Ghost Zone. And what you notice is, I mean, that sideband just cuts off at 200. Now, that's not a typical move that I would shoot for. I think that, Seth has taught me quite a bit about how there's a lot of really good things that can happen if you widen, this low mid-range. There's a lot of kind of warmth that can be had down there. A lot of width and good kind of powerful stance that can come from widening this stuff in a careful way.
It gives you a lot of weight to frame off of. Like you get.
Yeah, it's such a powerful, like that's another part of the box that doesn't get used a lot is the low frequencies in the sideband. That is the secret sauce. If you're not playing with that stuff, definitely give it a shot and join the approach, and we'll teach you how to do it appropriately, so you don't wind up with subs that are out of phase. But
smoosh, yeah,
yeah, complete. Like you literally, people. I no joke. I'm not gonna name who, but I've watched somebody widen a sub by flipping one side out of polarity. Don't do that. It's not a good move.
Yeah,
you're going to have a wide song, but at some great expense. So it's just not gonna feel right. So it's not gonna hit. So I see Thomas Xavier posting here.
Hitting different.
Yeah, it's gonna hit different. Let's see here. Instead of hertz splitting, it's splitting based on amplitude via gating. Yes, that's correct. And it's very specific to frequencies as well. Like you can actually have the side chain that is separating the amplitude into its various chains react primarily on one frequency group. So you can use like a band pass and have that be kind of the focal range. And let me show you what I mean. An easy way of doing that would be to just show you the oscilloscope. So in this context, I'm using the gate set up with a band pass, or sorry, a high pass. I'm using a full high pass EQ in the sideband. And I'm isolating just that. That's all that is going to the top. And then the lows are I'm still in the sideband, sorry. I'm in the ghost zone. Here we go. This is just that's what made it to the top. And that's what wound up in the bottom. Now, this is a really messy implementation of this, I will admit. Normally, I can get it much more dialed, but in this case, this actually wound up sounding good. So I went with this. But for an example, if I just duplicate this and show you what I'm talking about, if I solo the high band and kind of play with the threshold, you can get really, really nitpicky. Now, I'm not sure why it's not showing up. Possibly because it's just too low in level. Or no, okay. Whatever. Yeah, interesting. So it's really, you can get really specific to what you are actually isolating. And so, again, I'm not sure why that's not showing up, but that's okay. It's not important. Point being, you can get very, very, very specific if you dial in the sidechain settings that are actually determining what gets sent where. So, very much worthwhile to experiment with. Again, if anybody's watching this and you're not part of the approach, join the approach. I'll give it to you. If you join the approach tomorrow, or let's say, what's today? Today's Thursday. If you join the approach by Monday, I will give you this device. I promise you.
Oh, shit.
So, yes, free stuff. Free stuff. If you,
those are fighting
bonuses,
words.
if you, yes, if you join the approach, we'll put links in the chat. Then I will personally give you this device and a couple other ones that I've made. So I personally will hand you those, along with a very heartfelt thank you and welcome. So that's what's happening with this kick. Basically, I'm widening it, beefing it up, boom, 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 good to go. Okay, moving on. I keep hearing the chat go off. I need to find a way to silence my chat on.
Take a second. Yeah, you can just go ahead and take a second if you want.
Yeah, let me move over the 3 screens. Maybe that'll help. Maybe that'll help. All right, let's try it. So, yeah, moving on to things like the clap. Now, there's a lot of processing that I went through to kind of get to this texture. Again, had a little bit of help, and also we're using this was new technology for me, and I think Seth at the time we had just gotten this plugin. This is a magical plugin. Let me show you the clap.
Oh yeah, the gate.
Yeah, this thing is great. Now there are a lot of layers in here, so I won't spend a whole lot of time going through all of this in all of this agonizing detail because we'd be here all night. But I will go through and show you that there is nothing on these tracks. Like there's nothing, literally nothing at all on the individual tracks. There's a left and a right, which make up kind of the base of the clap, so to speak, B-A-S-E of the clap sound. Yeah, there's literally nothing on there at all. It only gets processed at the group level. So if I take all of this, group it up, turn it off, what you're hearing is just the raw stuff. Now here's the base layer of the clap. Right? Very classic 808, 909, probably a 909 synthetic clap. And we also have a clap transient, which is very much up the middle. Nothing really happened with those on channel at all. The clap transient got turned down a little bit. Now the magic comes in on the clap layer. I'm sorry, on the group layer itself. Now, what's interesting is it's a lot more forward without any of this junk on here, but it also is a lot more kind of out of the frame without all of this stuff on here. In the context is everything. It fits. And let's talk about that. Let's show you what that sounds like. Again, just playing this before and after the drums with the clap as it was versus where it is now. And that's an interesting move. I wouldn't have thought to make that move if it wasn't for the referencing. The referencing was what got us to that direction. That's not an intuitive move. I like my snares and claps right up front. I like to get punched in the face by the sound system, right? But this is house. We need to vibe. The clap cracking you in the forehead every time it plays is not vibing. Not for me. So, and not for the reference. So, first moves. I believe Seth actually, did you dial this in, or I think you dialed this in. So this is a really kick-ass plugin. If you don't know about Sony Oxford, Sonox, go check them out. Their plugins are a little pricey, but they are awesome and really well programmed. This is a drum gate. It's basically a frequency-specific way of dialing in decay. And if I play this, you can kind of see what it's doing. So if I play with this, like the clap hangs out for a little longer. If I tighten it up, see? It basically allows you to really easily dial in specific frequency ranges decay. And that is so flipping cool. So we had just gotten this for an album Seth had been mixing. And I believe, when did we get that? Was this wasn't Set It Off. This was...
I think that was for Scotty. I think it was Scotty Sire.
Sire.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Seth was mixing his album for Scotty Sire, and it required us getting this, and man, this thing is great. So yeah, Kurto, what? Yeah, this thing is amazing. It's
Yeah,
a
it's on
really
every
great plugin.
record
Now,
now.
yeah, it really is on literally every one that he's done since. Yeah, it's really great. Honestly, you can do things similar, and I'm going to say similar. It's not exact by any stretch. You can do things similar to this if you were creative with EQs and linear phase and all that stuff. But to have it all built in a nice, neat package like this, and to be as clean as this is, and to have it sound as clean as this, you got to get the plugin. So, and also it has some kind of really kick-ass sort of machine learning features, if I'm not mistaken, right, Seth? I've never actually played with those myself. Is that what it's got going on?
Shit. Sorry, my mic was muted. Yeah, it's got
Oh.
some ability to. You can use the detection side of things. If you switch over to the detection window, you can basically start to say. You see those options at the bottom, which is like learn, and then you have some like basically like level. It can find all of your individual transients, and you can set them to kind of a specific window of loudness. So you need to play back the entire stem into the drum gate or whatever the performance is. If it's just like if it's MIDI or if somebody playing live, obviously it has to be recorded. But basically it'll buffer it into the plugin itself. It'll identify all of your transients, and it will begin to create a more uniform performance out of those transients themselves without adjusting any of the bottom end gate that you've turned down. So it's like a post-process thing that happens. Like you gate first, and then you like line up all the transients later. And it saved me, like, there were these hat rolls that were happening in this one stem that, like, I could not lift without turning up a bunch of other shit. And I just tried it, and it like, laid out the entire performance of hats, like, all in a few seconds. I was just like, oh, like, I'm going to use the shit out of that. Like,
it's
so
such
helpful.
a really killer plugin. Honestly, I'm gonna play with that more. I need to when I have some time, I'll definitely want to play with that some more. This is a really great plugin, and in this context, because this is a really big room, we didn't need that. Like the reference itself, is nowhere near like anything like that. I mean,
yeah, way more subdued clap.
Yeah, tight, kind of like. So we definitely had to dial that back a little bit. Some compression to taste. This is a pretty aggressive compression setting, but again, I'm trying to smooth it out, and this is definitely one way to do that, to just mush it. And oh yeah, Thomas Xavier's asking to do a chat town. Yeah, we should do a chat town on it sometime. As soon as I have time, maybe this weekend, maybe Sunday, I can hop into chat town. We can just kind of hang out and talk about it. And for any newcomers, if this is your first time, chat town's where we just kind of hang out and talk about whatever. That doesn't have to be about mixing. We can do whatever. It's just it's open to everybody. Hop in there sometime, make friends. It's great. A lot of compression, actually, a lot of serial compression. If you look here, I've got a stereo linked compressor, just kind of mushing it. I'm not giving it a whole lot. 3.7, that's a fair amount. After that, more compression. Oh, sorry. Keep playing the John Summit track here. There we go. More compression with Pro C. And again, fast attacks. I am really trying to just take the edge off. Now, there's probably better ways of doing that. In this context, you can see I tried several things, like several ways of doing this. And the one thing that worked out was just serialized compression to the nth degree, right? I mean, really fast attack, pretty fast release. This is what got it this way. Now, I don't know that that's 100% necessary all the time. I definitely don't think it is, but in this context, it worked. Multiband, just clamp down on those high frequencies to hopefully just smooth them out a little bit. And automation on this throughout various sections, and this is something I definitely want to get to. I'll come back to this, but this is one of the big takeaways of this session. So stick around for just a little while longer. Let me get through the drums and bass, and then we'll and some of the instruments, and we'll come back and talk about this automation stuff, because this was sort of my big takeaway from doing this session. It was a big lesson for me in continuity of making sure that things evolve over time in the right way. You don't need things sitting static. and we'll come back and talk about that. So stick around for a little while longer. So in this regard, just EQing to taste, kind of getting things to set better amongst with the hi-hats. Those took a little bit of work as well. We'll dive into kind of softening those and whatnot. A little bit of imaging. Not very much at all. Practically none. A little bit of gain. Again,
reductive
none.
imaging and you see here, too, right? Like that's
reductive.
Pulling...
Yeah, I'm just kind of using that to pull back.
Yeah, the clap was back to that reference, right? The clap was in the reference. Exactly. The clap is like almost down the middle.
Yeah, in the sideband, like everything from 2.8K up is mostly hi-hat in the sideband. And if I could draw this, it would be like the clap in the sideband is just like doop bonk. There really isn't. I mean, it's even lower. It's like down here. It's like whoop. Now, realistically, it's probably rolling off a little softer, but still, you don't hear the high frequencies in the sideband of that clap. And I had to dial these back, a little bit here as well to kind of match that. Let me make sure I get out of those. There we go. And transient shaper. Now, this is not a common trick. And again, look at this, just nuking that transient. I really, really had to soften this thing quite a bit. That popping 1,000 hertz, which is what makes up a clap. If you don't know, grab a bunch of claps, look at them on a spectrum analyzer. It's like 1,000 hertz. You can take white noise and make a clap out of it, and it's, that is primarily going to be centered in the mid-range. And so the transient shaper here, I don't reach for them often, but when we do, you need them to do exactly what they're doing. So, taking off some of the edge a little bit here. So,
can we hear that clap with everything off, like the pre-processed clap? Yeah, just group everything and then turn it back on again. I'd love to.
Here you go. There's with nothing. Long tail, wide. Much more subdued, narrow, pushed back a little. Some of the pushback is gain, but other parts of it are kind of like the framing, because it's not as wide, it's kind of back. And in context, let's do a context thing here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And in context, let's turn that off.
Oh yeah. You change genres with that. You change genres with that processing.
That's literally what I wanted to say. Yeah, is that the first way it sounds like techno or something, big room, people are going to kill me for the house subgenres. Thomas Xavier, tell me what
that sounds like big room to me. Sounds like big room.
Yeah, big room, kind of like boom, 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 Yeah. But then you put all the processing on there, you restrain it, you kind of wrangle it in, and it's a lot tighter, and it definitely kind of brings it towards the genre that it's trying to be. That's the whole point here.
Smoothed out, and I love the low mid, that weird like that. Like the wheezing demon that was in the first clap, that's just completely gone from this. Can you play that again? Just listen to those low mids. It's so nice. It's like
it really just changes the whole thing.
I hear in the first one, I hear two different syllables. I hear and in the second one, I just hear like it's like they've been like almost repitched, and the lower part of the sustained reverb of the clap is now in like the correct frequency range, and everything just feels smoother.
Moving on, let's go to hi-hats. Hi-hats, these were really fun. These took a lot of tender love and care to kind of get feeling correct, mostly because of the fact that they needed to be softer. Again, in the in the print that we got sent, like right, like that alone. Listen to the difference in just the hi-hat alone. Just as before. Now, that is a dramatic shift. That's not normal. That's not what I would call an intuitive move for me. But again, the reference was what dictated that. And taking out these huge resonances like here at, what is that, 7K, just really cranking down on that with an EQ on this first main hi-hat here. That does a lot, honestly. Oh. It's funny, without the EQ, I can actually hear that frequency whistling. It's like
it's
like
a bit of a resonance. Yeah.
You can hear that. Yeah. So that was an interesting move, and then doing some bit of stereo width to kind of bring up the content in the sideband to match the reference. A little bit of compression to just smooth things out, and some more automation, which again I will come back to. Hi-hat number 2. There's the classic open hat without anything on here at all. Let's just group up all of this stuff. Kind of flat, kind of right up the middle, kind of boring.
Wow. That was what came in?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah,
can we hear that? Can we hear that in context?
In context. Yeah. So here's this hi-hat. Well, it'll be a little difficult, so what I'll do is turn off all of it. And then let me put this on a key command, so this makes it real easy. What have I not used? Let's use number 2. Number 2 is on that, and number 2 is on that. So make sure those are both off. Yes, they are. Okay, so here's the hi-hats without processing. And let me just do the drums. Look at that resonance right there. And there's with.
Oh, wow. So much better. So much better.
Insanely different. Yeah, it is just wildly different. If I loop this, let's go here.
Can we listen to the whole mix? I want to hear it. Because
the whole mix
I think some of that frequency shift matters to the rest of the music, right? Like you're not just picking a random frequency to repitch the hat to.
Yeah, no. This is all contextual and based off of the rest of the elements. So here's the hi-hats without processing at all. Just sticking out like a sore thumb. And I'll loop the process. Here's the processing.
Oh yeah, so much smoother.
Yeah, it sits better with the crash. It's not like super forward. And, this whole mix was just a little bit more subdued in the first place anyway. But, at least in the highs, the tech house genre is like, it's not about cracking highs. It's not raging rhythm or anything. So we needed that to be rounded off a little subdued. And that's exactly what that was. So how we got there, again, was taking off some of the resonant bits of that first hat. The second hat, the second open hat, using multiband here, because multiband, as Seth likes to say, is very good at flattening things. And he's right. They're very, very, very good at flattening things. And that's exactly why I used it here. 100%, that's just full on. I wanted to crush 3K up. And just to kind of keep that tame. And excuse me for 1 second. Let me turn off this heater over here. I live in Tennessee. It's a little cold, and I've got a heater on here. But right now, I am cooking. Give me 1 second. There we go. Much, much, much better. Okay. This room is very dynamic in its temperature. Literally in the next 5 minutes, I might be freezing. So, yeah, needed to crank down on 3K-ish to really tighten that up. Without that, I mean, just quietens, just makes the whole top end quieter. Like all of that, basically everything audible, just turn that down a little bit. Smooth that out. Again, resonant EQ cuts, just taking the resonances, the really harsh bits. If I solo these, and boosting the parts that we like, this sort of 3K area here. After it's been tamed, it's fine. Like that's the kind of, I don't know what to call that. I don't have a word for it. Seth, do you have a word for that? Like this area of the hi-hats? Because usually the kind of like ear-piercing tinny bit is like 10K, 6K, and 12K. But then like below that is like that chunky part of the hat. I don't know what to call that.
I just
I don't
generally
know if you have a
speaking, like,
name for that.
yeah, just the body of the symbol. It's
The
just like
body
where,
of the hat, yeah.
yeah, because like there's any of those, like if you kind of circle around over like let's say 1K to 4K, you're generally looking at about in 1K to about 4K. That's usually the body of symbols. So it's where a lot of the air noise is, or the simulated air noise from the actual symbol moving air to a microphone, where there's like tone there, but it's more about like it's more weight. And then as you move higher and higher, like 5 to like 8 or 9, those are your kind of like the note area. Maybe 4.5, 4 to like 8 or 9 is where like the actual note of the symbol is. Beep, 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 like wherever that like actual ring is, which is, you can see why Clint is pulling some of those resonance off of there in that area, because it's like those sometimes that tone teek teek teek, like you can hear the note that he's pulling off there. It's got an actual like a frequency to it, and then everything at the top, that's just like air, or sometimes brittleness if it's a bad sample. Or totally. That's like the last place you'll get a note. Really, the rest of it is just
yeah. It's like this area right here, and this is something that honestly that you mentioned the other day to me that had never really occurred to me. Literally from here, from 10K up, there's 10,000 hertz. There's as many frequencies from here to here as there are from here to here. That's kind of a mind-blowing concept. Thank you, logarithms. But that's, there's a lot of really, there's a lot of delicacy in this area. There's a lot of frequencies in this area, and you can really dial that in. In this case, I did
Clint,
widen
before
the
you
sound,
move on, if you don't mind. Can you talk a little bit about how you find those? How you locate those frequencies you want to remove? Because you mentioned before about sometimes it's more important to know what you don't like.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious, besides you just saying that they're resonant, why?
Yeah, what do they sound like? Why?
And how do you find them? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so like at this point, all of this stuff hasn't been done yet, right? Like this is all not entirely linear, so obviously you're going to drop processors where you need them to feed the chain, but sometimes let's just treat that like, okay, I'm going in here, this is a brand new, session for me. I've just now tamed the top end of it here with a multiband, and I'm like, okay, what am I hearing in there that I don't like? Well, you can do the sweep and boost. That sometimes works. I mean, I'm not opposed to that. I don't think that should be the only way, but I do this, Seth does this, and I've been taught this in school as well, is like sometimes just try to whistle, or like mentally like shh, shh, with your mouth, try to like get the frequency that you're hearing, and then move the EQ till you find that frequency. That's a good way of doing it. So like that kind of like sizzly, I can just hear it, like, and you can even see it if I turn this off. That little bitty bugger right there, right at 7K it's just there. And the more, keep in mind when you're doing this is kind of where people get a little confused when they're doing this sort of boost and sweep approach to finding frequencies. If you boost the Q factor of the EQ, the resonance, high, everything is going to sound like a resonance. So don't do that. Just keep it, a little loosey-goosey, and then just lift up, and you're kind of looking for a general range, right? Like clearly if I go too high or too high of a Q, like too high in gain or too high in Q or bandwidth, depending on what school of thought you're in, that is going to sound like a resonance no matter if it's out of whack or not. Like, right? That clearly sounds horrible when it's like this. But
yeah, I gotta cut that. I gotta cut that frequency. Cut that frequency, Clint.
Yeah, I gotta cut. Yeah, it's too much. It's like, no. It's like, let's get that out of there. But then, like, in the context of the broader sound, like, it's not that bad. Like, I mean, yeah, it's sticking out a little bit, but that's okay. That doesn't bother me in the context nearly as much as this little thing. Now, why that one? Okay, in this context, it doesn't even sound like it's as bad as maybe the other one when I boosted it. But when you mix these two symbols together, there's just so much buildup at 7K because both symbols have that happening like crazy. That's just that spot for that exact symbol sample. These are just slight variations of the same symbol sample. The same symbols, let's say that 10 times fast. They're variations of the same sound. And so both of them are going to need cut there. And otherwise, there's just going to be a crazy amount of buildup. And so starting there and taking out sort of that airiness and that brightness, that sizzle, was really the first move, just to kind of smooth things off. And say just doing that kind of just rolls it off a little bit and lets it be a little bit more dull and smooth. And then maybe after the fact, with a little compression, once I kind of dial in the exact areas to kind of take out, this whole thing can be boosted up again like this. It's just I need to get those kids out of there because they're the problem, not the overall range. It's kind of like once you carefully kind of carve out the notches of the bad problems, like you can boost that whole area now, and then it's it's a little better, right? And that's what happened here at the end.
Well, at least relatively, right? So when
relatively, yeah,
if you've got a 3 dB cut and then you're adding a 3 dB boost, now those resonant areas are just back at unity, and everything around
they're
them
back
is
to where they were.
Yeah,
exactly. And it would be, it's practically no different, except for the fact that it is a relative process, and that's kind of what matters here. And then that after that, like when you stereo widen the sound, and this was an interesting example. I shouldn't have done it this way, but I did. This was not something I would do nowadays. Like I'm looking at this and I'm like, why did I do it this way? Like there's so many, what the hell was I thinking? But like,
if it works, it works.
It works. So normally, nowadays I might put, the stereo imaging stuff at the end. This kind of junk where you're panning the sample. And why did I even pan the sample in the first place? Well, because if I didn't pan the sample, I think actually I put it over with this other sample. That's what it was. I think I put it with the other one. Just like a little offset, just a little off center. And that kind of shifted the whole high end just over to the right, just a little bit. And I think that was actually a good move just in the context of the mix. So a lot of this stuff kind of doesn't get done in isolation. Like I said, I'm usually listening maybe without vocals. So let me take out the vocal here. And also even the melodics. So like. What you notice without this rack on, this hi-hat layer, and it's a little tricky to hear, but without this rack on, this hi-hat layer sounds, I can visualize it. It's like the top end is dulled off a little bit, like pushed back a little bit, and then the mid-rangey bit, this bit right here, like 3K, 2K, 4K, somewhere in there, is not as forward. It's not like the hi-hat just feels like it's back behind the other hi-hat. Listen to this. It's like without that rack, the hi-hat doesn't feel like a singular hi-hat. It feels like, it feels like a thinner version of the hi-hat. I don't know. It's just like with this rack on, it feels thicker, and that's the whole point. After that, I need to kind of move a little faster here because we are scooting. It's already 9 o'clock my time. So a little bit of compression to just kind of smooth those out a little further. Frequency shifter to lift up the sound in frequency. And now this is a really good trick for hi-hats. It can work on snares too, but just keep in mind that anytime you use a frequency shifter, you are unlocking phase, and the hits will not be the same every time. But you can use a frequency shifter to lift up energy in a hi-hat. You can literally kind of quote-unquote repitch a hi-hat without actually repitching the hi-hat. The problem is that when you repitch something, so if I like break off a sound here, like this little green clip, and if I go in here, turn on warp, beats mode, and I start pitching this around, like let's say, okay, I need the hi-hat brighter, right? Like the high frequencies of the hi-hat don't connect well to the other hi-hat. Like this is just a darker sample or something. And EQ is just not getting me there. Sometimes you have to repitch the hi-hat to get it to connect better in the high end. But the problem with doing it this way is, one, artifacts. That's the first and foremost. And then two, artifacts because it's using a warping algorithm. You could put it in a sampler, but you're still going to have artifacts and the artifact in the second case, the second example, is timing. When you pitch things, even when you're doing it, well, warping is kind of designed to pitch them without really messing with time in certain circumstances, but at the expense of artifacting. Now, if you pitch it without, let's say I've got really precise and I got in here and I made a cut right there at the beginning of that and I wanted to pitch it now, well, now you're shortening the sample. If the higher you pitch it, it's pitch and wavelength are inversely proportional. So, the higher the pitch, the shorter the wavelength. So, and that's what's happening here. You see the sound literally get shorter. And so that obviously is not what we want. If we want to maintain our decay, oftentimes with drum samples, the decay is critical to get to the actual overall sound of the cohesion of the kit. Keep that in mind. If you want things to sound better, sometimes just make sure that they decay evenly or at the right rate. But what you can do with frequency shifters is pitch them higher with a frequency shifter slightly, and it doesn't change the length. Here's what I'm talking about. So without it, right? It actually put it in tune with the other sound and with the key of the track.
Question there. When you're saying that, when you're not just when you're doing this work, right? You're not just working in a vacuum.
No.
When you're dialing that hat in, what are you listening to dial that hat in with?
Yeah, often it'll be either a melodic element and or the snare, because the snare also contains kind of high frequency information. So you have to make sure that you're tying things together in a uniform way up there. Also, if it's talking about if you're trying to do this for the purposes of key, not just the purposes of frequency, you can be listening to something like the sub and make sure that makes sense. Or any other kind of melodic element. If you have a bell or something, that'd probably be a good idea. You could pitch the harmonics of this hi-hat to kind of match that. And so without this, I've got the bass in. It's like it just lifts it a little bit.
It makes the track feel more urgent. It gives it a sense of urgency with the higher frequency shift.
That word.
And it makes it feel more in key. Yeah.
I like that word. Yeah, I think that's a good word for this. It makes it feel more urgent. I didn't put those words together with it, but yeah, it does. It makes it feel more cohesive to me that is lifted up a little bit, because this first sample, look at the high frequencies. Okay, it's got high frequencies in roughly that kind of a move, but then the second one, you can even see it right here. Look at that gap. That gap in the high frequencies. Now, I don't recommend mixing visually 100% of the time. I don't think that's a good idea. But I'm going to leave this green mark here for just a second. Let me turn this off. It's little subtle things like this resonance. Actually, I'm going to get rid of it. This resonance right here. See that big spike? It's not like you're going to conscientiously notice that in the song. Nobody's going to be listening to the track. If I hadn't done that, nobody would hear that and be like, oh my God, that hi-hat has a resonance at 2 kilohertz that is out of key. Nobody is going to say that. But it's one of those things, like so much of mixing, that you'll do, not because people will notice it if you don't do it, but because they would notice it if you didn't do it. Like they don't know that they don't know what it is, but it's something different about it. Like if I play that back to back, it sounds better in context, right? Like it sounds better with this frequency shift than without it. And you wouldn't know that was the case until you've heard it that way. And then all of a sudden, oh, without that, it doesn't sound right. Okay, then I know that was actually a good move.
So when you're making that decision, is that kind of like you're just trying it because you're like, maybe it feels wrong, or are you hearing the kind of offsetness as you go? Like, is it the other layers that are telling you it's out, or is it itself?
Often it's your ears are telling you something is disconnected. And in my particular instance, not just in this case, but often if I ever have to do this, it's that if I notice that the I visualize like levels and frequency response as a front to back phenomenon. And so like if the high frequencies are loud, then they're kind of coming out at me more than the low frequencies are. And like frequency is up and down, volume is front to back. So, and what I'm hearing in this context is that this lower hi-hat level or hi-hat layer, I can't like connect it in the right way with just an EQ. And all watermelon everything in the chat.
So like that experience of where you're
Yep.
like, you were just saying, you're like, I'm feeling like this thing's sticking out. It's like you've tried, what you've worked on through the chain so far is like you've done the EQing and you've done the compression and you've done the leveling, but it's still kind of sticking out.
It's not there. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
still not
it's not-
there. And then it's like
too quiet
oh,
and it's gone,
maybe-
or it's too loud and it's too forward. But it's like, it's
yeah,
not
and you
gelled.
actually talk about this. You talk about this in the approach in the, I believe, the dynamics section, where you're talking about like if you make a movement, if you turn a parameter and you barely turn it, and all of a sudden that's too far, it's something else that needs to change. There's something else that needs to happen, and that's kind of, yeah, it's exactly to your point, which is where, okay, if I've tweaked this with an EQ, and again, this may not have happened. This may not have happened linearly, where I may not have done this immediately after compressing, which is done immediately after the gain. Like I may have not done this in this order, but if I have tried to EQ it, I mean, clearly I've got an EQ over here. I've tried other EQ.
Yeah, you got multiband in there.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's soothe. I tried soothe on it. I tried a different type of compression, reacting differently. I tried all these different things, and if it still is just not quite there, it's probably that the frequency response is just not correct in the fundamental aspects of pitch. So, if I lift up with this frequency shifter, it's going to be bringing the high frequencies of this sound closer to the high frequencies of the other sound while still retaining its time domain properties, which is ultimately what we want. It will skew. This works really well with cymbals because cymbals are not an inherently harmonic, musically harmonic phenomenon. They are a sort of they're atonal, so they're not a tonal phenomenon. And you can do this with non-tonal elements all day long. Snare drums this is great for those because typically snares are not tonal. Now they do have tonal components like the resonant thunk of a big dubstep snare, that 200 hertz thwack.
The boot.
That's obviously a tonal component. Yeah, that thunk. But when you can use a frequency shifter on those because of the fact that if you pitch it like either in a sampler or just with raw audio or repitch mode or whatever, you're going to be changing the timing of it. But then also you're actually moving. If we look at a spectrum analyzer, imagine we have our big 200 hertz thunk, and then let's say that's a snare drum, okay? And then all the cruft that comes with that, the noise down here, right? So there's our big thwack. You've got your body up here, and then you've got your kind of sizzle and stuff up top. If you pitch it any other way than a frequency shifter, you're going to actually be changing where these high frequency roll-off actually occurs. If we pitch the snare higher, then this will now occur higher up. And if we pitch it lower, it's going to move way far down. But if you use a frequency shifter, you can move this resonant fundamental all the way up and down the spectrum, and the high frequency content really doesn't change very much at all. And that just has to do with pure math as to how that's actually working. Don't have time to go into it, but it's basically just the fact that the difference from 200 hertz to 300 hertz is a lot smaller than the difference between, is a lot bigger than the difference between 10,000 and 10,300, right? 10,300 to our ears is not a very far distance at all, but 100 to 200 is, and frequency shifters move things linearly. They move all frequencies by this amount. So you're not really going to notice the high frequency shift that much, but you'll definitely notice the low frequency shift quite a bit. And this makes it really good for things like snares, but also great for things like hi-hats, which are atonal in nature to begin with. You can really kind of lift the energy of them without so much as changing the temporal properties of them. Thomas Xavier tends to smear those hats as well as hold the space. Yeah, it does, definitely. It's almost like a compression/reverb phenomenon to me when I hear it. Yeah, it really is it's a very cool trick. I don't know, I think I might have gotten that from Mr. Bill or somewhere a long time ago, but really good trick. Now, carrying on through the piece, I do got to move a little faster just because of time, but we got some other things in here. All of this is basically rinse and repeat. I just have to kind of dial in A, the level, B, the framing of the thing against other elements that are in similar frequency, and the transients. So try to get this thing a little softer. And
can we jump forward?
Yeah,
if you're gonna move, not to cut you off, but when you're done with this one, I would love to get into some. We've done some rhythm sections the last couple of times we've done this, and we start top down, and then we never get to basses or melodies. I'd love to get into some basses and vocals if we can. Yeah. Unless anybody has any questions. Actually, let's go over. Let's
go to the chat.
Go to the chat real quick and just see if
while I have the
any of
ability to do that
makes sense. Yeah, cool. Hang on.
Here, let me switch back here. There we go.
What's up, everybody? I hope you've been enjoying it so far. Clint, you've been killing the game, man. Some of those changes that you're adding in there are stupid, man. They sound so good.
Yes.
Thank you. They really do pull everything together. That's you really killed it on this one. Especially like you keep saying, you're like, I've not mixed house music that much. For you to it says a lot about the technique that you're using to actually connect those dots that haven't been done before, and really trusting your ears and really spending the time to like really dial in the difference between, because I know we had a lot of conversations about, like, you were sending me things, you're like, hey, what do you think of this? And we were talking a lot about that, the way the track showed up is so skewed to a specific style of house mixing. And there was a lot of conversations about like really getting to know the genres. And there's so much to be said about like the work you did kind of digging into the way that it's not just not, and this is such a, and we've been having this conversation actually a lot. There's such a gray area in you're handed something and then what are you handing back to them? And how much of that do you keep and how much of that do you get rid of? And how much of what you got handed is the genre or is them? Because they're in the genre, they're making the genre, but are they? Is it? And should you change it? It's that like,
did I go too far? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Totally. And that like finding that sweet spot between the reference. I just feel like you've done a really great job, like maintaining some of the quintessential aspects of the original piece, where like the hat was a little forward and the snares were a little wide, but the reference is so kind of like to this. It just sounds so quintessentially. It's like it's a perfect example of that genre and of that style of music. And I feel like you were able to maintain the soul of what you had here and carry it over to the other one. And I don't know if you can talk about that process at all, but that's what I would like to know more about.
I do. Yeah, I can. And that's actually a really good opportunity to kind of pivot to that, because while I have the ability to switch my camera, let's go back here real quick. Back in Ableton. So part of that process really is getting to know the genre and all the micro details that you pick up from the reference. And part of that is also kind of the ambient space of the whole thing. That's one of the first things I had noticed, was like how there are certain sounds, specifically like this little chord hit, I believe here. Oh, I've got the group turned off. Yeah, things like that kind of are in the reference. It has sounds like that too, kind of momentary, ear candy that is either it's there, but it's not dry. It's not like jumping out at you. I mean, it gets your attention, but it's not like a standout separate from the rest of the framing. And part of getting this to sound similar to the reference, yet unique and like can maintain its essence, was one, getting the ambience correct. Otherwise, things would just sound too disconnected, disparate, and not cohesive. But then also doing the automations, and that was a big thing that I definitely want to get into before we eventually wrap. Is how that kind of happened. And this, like I said, that was a big lesson for me in this track, and that's one of my biggest takeaways here. Now let's talk about this ambience a little bit. Essentially, this was taken. This took a lot of inspiration from. Actually, this was my first real experience using this kind of 3 reverb technique in this exact way on this track. And this is a really big benefit to this track, I think, was getting this dialed in.
Can you just tell us what those returns are real quick?
Yeah,
I'm so curious. There's a lot of returns.
6 returns here. 3 of these are reverbs. 3 of these are, or 2 of these are delays or echoes, and then the other one is a chorus. And
nice.
These are this 3 reverb thing is a pretty standardized thing nowadays. In the approach, we kind of teach this, where we have essentially one main type of verb, or maybe even different types of verb, but they're all kind of a multiple of each other in terms of timing, set up in a certain way such that you can easily get like sounds of a certain type sent to the short one, sounds of a certain type sent to the medium and the long, and it kind of gives you a really good, easy way of dialing in the level of kind of depth that the sound that you're adding reverb to sits in. And that's what made this work really well. Basically, you found, I'm not going to go into too deep as specifics about it, but find one that works and then use that reverb to kind of create these other ones that are similar. And it can kind of create this network of reverbs that you have really quick access to that will allow you to sort of dial in the amount of reverb on each type of sound in a really controlled manner. Specifically, like controlling the front to back layers. And now, if I solo all of these reverbs and just kind of play this from the drop.
Can you turn them up a little bit for us? I know it's going to be weird in the mix. Just like maybe drop a utility on there. Or just cranking them up on channel. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can hear it. Basically, it sounds like everything is sort of in one space, and that's kind of the idea. You want that kind of cohesion. Now, that also is going to be happening with the other returns here. If I play all of this together, I'll drop a utility on here so we can hear this a little better. The delays are actually a little louder than the verbs in this track. Didn't need a whole lot of verb to create that cohesion. But dialing in this reverb was really critical to kind of get this thing to sound cohesive. And because of sounds, this song has so many of these little fill type of sounds, these little, like that funky synth pluck here. It's already got delay inside the actual source audio itself. If I turn off everything, if I turn off all of these returns and I turn off the all the processing that actually is on that track, and there's no ambience on the channel directly, but you can hear there's like a like kind of repeating delay in that audio itself. Now, that makes it a little tricky on the surface because it's like, well, it's already got delay. Well, it doesn't, though. It cuts off hard right here at the downbeat of bar 70. So, and you can't see that for the, maybe you can. Can't tell. No, you can't. So right here at the end, it just cuts off. So if I, even with all this processing, there's no ambience in here, so that doesn't change it. But as soon as we put this ambience on, it begins to kind of sit into the track. Now I'm going to play it without the ambience. I'll play it from right here without any ambience. And actually, let me just play the whole drop without any ambience, not even focusing on that one sound. Just listen to the drop without anything on it. It's just dry. Like when that little chord hit happens, it's there and then it's gone. And it's just like, okay. Like it doesn't feel like a whole complete production, But with ambience, right? So like that's what's interesting about the kind of cohesion and to get this to sound exactly like that reference did as far as stylistic choice goes. The ambience of this John Summit track is really paramount to its sound. I mean, the kind of just the subtle little delays, like bum, 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 little ping pong delays. You've got the ambience of the vocal saying troubadour or whatever he's saying. That is critical to the kind of cohesion of that track and really critical to nail in this track to get it to sound like that track. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it that I have to get into is the automation. Now, this was a big one. This, you can look here on some of these things, there was a lot of little automation points. In this specific example, there's actually two different side chains set up to the kick. This is on the vocals, so that when the kick plays, 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 so that when the kick pla certain patterns, there's this, the kick actually doubles up, and I know you've heard it already, that instead of just being a straight 4 on the floor kick drum pattern, it actually goes like a bum, bum, bum. And right, there's like a downbeat, 3 hits right on the downbeat. So, oh, whoops. Come on, get out of here, John Summit. We ain't trying to listen to you right now. Here you go. Oh, that's the vocal. There we go. Right out of the gate. Bum, bum, bum. And then like right over here at the kind of turnaround. Little kick build up, little ghost note, bum, right? This happens pretty often. Every downbeat, there's 3 kicks or 4 kicks. Look at that. Now, that's not typically, in my experience, that's not very common. Bum, 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 bum. And then here's another one, little skip rhythm. So when that happens, the compression on the vocal, I'm knocking the vocals out of the way, like I am bunch of other elements, and this happens not just the vocals. This happens on a lot of other elements. The basses, the vocals, the synths, all of these have 2 different kick drums on there. Or sorry, 2 different compressors responding to the kick drum. Because when those little double up ghost note moments happen, if I didn't swap compressors to a less reactive compressor during those moments, the compression would build up and it would bury everything in the kick. The kick, when those dun-dun-dun-dun happens, everything is getting super quiet, and then it's just the kick just swallows the whole mix. So during those exact moments, every time that happens, throughout every group, you have to automate. Well, you don't have to, but I did. I automated 2 compressors to switch. And the only difference, well, not the only difference, but the real difference here is that one of them is less reactive than the other. And so if I play this on, let's say, does it do it on the sub? No, it doesn't do it on the sub. It does it on the bass, though, the bass actual synth bass. And here's kind of what the main bass top sounds like itself. Now, that's probably very quiet. It's actually very quiet in this part of the track. That's the main timbral element of the bass here. But what's happening is every time, and I'll try to maintain my levels here, every time the kick happens, again, like I said, it's just switching compressors because the kick would just be building up too much. This happens on the vocals. I could probably do it on the vocals a little easier than I can that exact bass sound, unless I go over here. Let's try maybe over here. Yeah, so let's try that, and let's solo the kick. That definitely sounds a little weird because I'm boosting it, so. So I'm getting about 6 dB of reduction, and then just for those little skip moments, I'm getting a little less than, definitely less than 6 dB. I'm getting actually about the same, but it's happening faster and a different kind of profile. And that was dialed in using my understanding of how these filters are affecting the source content, which is a kick drum. When you high pass a kick drum, if you have a kick drum that my terrible drawing, let's just make a, ugly little kick drum waveform like that. So that's your kick drum beforehand. If you high pass that kick drum, that will become something much more transient. Something like this. And so I'm taking advantage of the fact that that's how high-pass filters are working. When you remove the low frequencies, it goes from this long tail of a kick drum to this short transient sound. And that's what I'm using. This is the one that I'm using to trigger, to have this compressor react to. See, I'm high-passing pretty high up. So, with that said, this compressor is just reacting a lot quicker. And I actually had to give it some release in order for it. You see, the first one doesn't have any release whatsoever. It's actually just tightly following what the kick is actually doing. But the second one actually got a little bit of release to kind of smooth out that profile, that ducking profile a little bit more. If I switch over here to this mode, you might actually be able to see it a little better. So See, look how long this profile is. And then look how tight these are. See? Pumping nice and thoroughly and smoothly, but then these are like really tight. And see right there for that, those big 16th notes or whatever that is critical. You have to do that kind of stuff. Otherwise, again, like I said, it just wouldn't sound as smooth. It would sound very jarring. The compression would sound a little jarring. Now, that's one aspect of the automation, but the most important aspect that I learned during this process was level automation throughout the various sections. You cannot simply leave everything static. What works in one section does not work for all sections. And there's going to be, and I think my big takeaway from this that Seth pointed out to me is that this is house music. Yeah, it's primarily going to be the same content playing over and over again, but that doesn't mean it has to sound boring. It doesn't mean it has to stay static. And if you look at the master here, I believe, did I not automate the master? No, I think I automated everything else except for the master. Sometimes you have to go through here and automate the master to come up and down just a little bit. But in this context, I think what I did instead is automate everything individually. And so if I get rid of these returns for a little bit more screen space and take a look here, for things like these effects, they're 2 dB quieter in the intro than they are during the drop. If we look at the vocals, which I haven't gotten into too deeply, now that's not the vocals. Let's go down here. Yeah, right here. These are automated 2 dB down in the intro than they are in the drop, right? And this kind of automation in this way throughout the various sections, notice this one kind of fades out really slowly. Now, what section is that? I'll bet you that's during the breakdown. Yeah, it is. So this kind of automation and this attention to detail with regard to creating a flow that is dynamic over a period of time is what carries the emotion of the song forward, as opposed to letting things be loud all the time. Once you get the mix dialed in at the quote unquote the nugget, if you're in the approach, you know what the nugget is. If you're not in the approach, what are you doing? And you got to learn what the nugget is. You got to join the approach. And again, if you join by Monday, I will give you, screw it, I will give you all of my racks that I have personally made.
Oh,
if you join the approach by Monday, words. I will give you, I will get you all of the racks I have personally made. So join the approach. But when you mix the nugget like this, you can't just leave things static. You have to change them smoothly over time throughout the various sections because there are various emotions happening, right? The drop, Seth says this to me plenty of times. He's like, the drop doesn't need to be as loud as the intro doesn't need to sound like the drop, right? The outro doesn't need to be as loud as the drop. The breakdown definitely doesn't need to sound like the drop as far as loudness goes. And so things can slowly evolve over time. Now, these are pretty sweeping changes. This is not necessarily always going to work. And in fact, most of the times, this kind of long 8-bar, 16-bar change is never going to work. But it's a really genre case-specific thing as well. And in context here, also, I've done the kick is actually changing over time. Now, this one was one that I had never done before. Seth taught me this, where you can see the kick at the outro isn't as loud. It's only 1.5 dB down from the kick the rest of the time. But even though the kick is loud at the beginning, it's full volume at the beginning, it's not got the same timbre. Now, if we click here at the beginning, let me scoot over here. Watch the EQ. At the drop, which is right here at this track locator, this locator 3, if I click, the high shelf comes up, and this is basically manipulating the scale of the EQ. So throughout the various sections of the song, boom, like the intro doesn't have as much high frequencies. The kick doesn't have as much high frequencies. And then throughout the kind of washout section, it also doesn't have as much high frequencies. Now, it's actually not the same amount. I actually had to come down a little bit more at the intro. And you don't notice that kind of stuff happening. I bet you, when I first played this, if I didn't say anything at all, nobody, or maybe very few of you, would pick out the kick is darker in the beginning. The only way you would really know that is if you got really good hearing and you're really paying close attention, or you're like jumping, comparing sections. And that's really important to do. The drop doesn't have to be the same level. Here's the gain. That's where the gain is on the kick. Actually, that's the drums overall. Check that out. So the overall drums are 2 dB quieter in the intro than they are at the drop. In the washout, they still say the same volume. Once this kind of break moment happens right here, nobody has any idea that just dropped 2 dB off a cliff, right? But if it didn't do that, you would notice. If it didn't do that,
for sure,
it really, you would notice the kind of the static nature of the tune. And that's what these little changes kind of add up to over time. And this was a big lesson for me working on this track, was how that can be a major benefit. And actually, this was an interesting one on this clap. Oh, it looks like we've still got all of this stuff turned off. Yeah, I'll make sure that... There we go. So, yeah, making sure we're actually listening with everything in there. So that was a big lesson for me. And another thing was, looks like on the automation side of things, we've got this no clip empty pack here. If you're familiar with the approach, you know what these no clips are. It's just a way of gaining down before a plugin, then gaining up afterwards, so that the plugin itself doesn't see a loud signal. Can really help the sound quality. It can also help maintaining... overall, it's really for sound quality, but there's a lot of reasons you might want to do this. In any case, automating on limiters in very specific sections for just moments. Look at this. It just turns on for just a moment on the clap, just to soften it whenever the clap plays this sort of, this rhythm. So, and this is like the full clap stem. I didn't even wind up using that. I wound up using the individual layers because it had a better sound to it. But check this out. Like, you wouldn't notice that the clap is being limited for a nanosecond, but it is. Right? Like, you really can't tell that that's happening, but it's happening, and it's happening quickly. And that's the kind of little continuity bits that taught me a valuable lesson about maintaining the soul of a piece and its evolution over time, but also how to kind of do this in an appropriate way where it's not obstructing the track. Like, you don't just need things to be static. So check this out. Just 1 little dB of gain reduction was enough for that section. Because, again, when you have multiple hits happening in rapid succession, going through compression, I mean, there's a lot of compression here. It's going to build up, and it's going to build up in these compressors, and the things that the compressors don't catch, that limiter's there to take care of. So those are just a few of the more interesting bits that I had, more interesting revelations I had while working on this track. If anybody has any specific questions, I'm all ears. But it is 9:30 in the Central Time Zone. It's 7:30. Oh, yeah, 7:30 in Pacific. If anybody has any specific questions, I am all ears. I'm trying to answer any.
Let's pull it back.
Any questions before my computer, before my monitor, my iPad dies. My iPad is the second screen over here.
Clint is not going to be able to switch the screen anymore. Can you switch back?
Not going to be able to switch my screen.
Let's see if we have any more questions. I'm not.
But I'm proud of it. It lasted this whole time. It lasted the full.
It did well. The iPad battery is pretty good.
Yeah.
Nice.
It is. And I have it plugged in. It's like, it should be charging. I guess it's just 5 volts from the computer is not enough to keep it going while it's on full time.
Oh, yeah. No. You could reduce brightness to keep it going a little while longer.
I did. Yeah, that's what I did a minute ago, and it's definitely helping.
Still going to die. I don't think we have very many other questions. Let's hit back to the group. Let's see any other cues. Children, does anybody... Anything you want to ask Clint about this thing?
Oh, Hellbruck. Yeah, Hellbruck. I see your statement here about sometimes turning things on and off gives you clicks in the render.
Pops and
clicks. It definitely
yep.
can. Yeah, pops and clicks. That's a big problem. Sometimes we will separate things off onto an entirely different channel and then just have that whole channel always have the thing on it, and then just cut the audio over to it for that one moment. That way it makes things a little easier. You can also have a problem, especially if you were doing this with compressors or anything like that. Like almost always the first sound to go through a compressor is not getting compressed very much. Like the very first few milliseconds are not really getting anything happening to them because the compressor hasn't reacted yet. So
totally.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, if anybody has any cues, I'm all ears. Otherwise, I mean, obviously, feel free to hit me up or Seth up in DMs, and we will respond. And if anybody,
it's been a good Clint. You really did. That track definitely came out came out awesome, man. Really.
Oh yeah, I love this track. This is a fun one. Yeah, this is available on Spotify. I will post a link here in a little bit, and I will make sure that everybody go show Londen Summers some love.
I'll stick it into the group.
Sick. I believe this is her first track on Spotify. So
sick.
It came out really well too. Yeah, she did great. The vocal processing on this, for what it's worth, is and the instrumentation processing, just to quickly go through that, there's not a whole lot happening on here. You can look at the guitar. Look at that. The guitar already had processing in it.
Oh, we can't see your screen.
Oh,
now you're doing it.
I'm doing it. Red lights. But I didn't get red lights.
Red lights.
There we go. Yeah.
There you go.
So, very simple. I mean, minimalistic as can be for some of these instruments, because you know what? Didn't need a whole lot. Some of them didn't even get processed because why? They sounded good. This one definitely did. This one's a sticky wicket. This sound. That one definitely got a lot of treatment because it without it, it's got some distortion. It's got not a lot of low end. With the rack. I'm really leaning into.
Can you loop that a little bit for us? Can you just loop that and turn it on and off?
Yeah, loop that. Yeah, let me do this. So here's before. It's kind of subtle, but in the context, let me just play the whole track here.
Oh, no, I can totally hear it. The low mids come up like crazy.
The low mids, it's just like that. That was really important to get up. And also, that's in the sideband. Like, in the sides, I'm compressing the low energy in the sideband and lifting that like crazy. And also EQing with the mid-side EQ pretty extremely to try to get that to set well in the ghost zone. Because without any of this stuff, if we look at the ghost zone, without this, right? It's like a lot of, it's a lot of band passing. It's a lot of mid-range content. But then here with this on, it's the same content. It's just kind of slanted this direction, right? Like it's tilted up slightly, right? So like this area is just kind of lifted a little bit, and that really helped it cut. Like the low mids are often nuked in people's tracks. Don't cut your low mids as much as you think you should. I promise. That's another key insight here. So yeah, without that, in the context of the full track. Oh, in the ghost zone. It really kind of fills it out and makes it feel a little bit more full and in the frame a little bit better. And that was kind of a sticky wicket to get nailed down. A lot of the other things are not incredibly important. They weren't very loud in the mix. Like this thing, not a whole lot going on there. But without the processing on it, it really just wasn't doing anything. So let me grip that up. Yeah, like that. Just kind of gives it that little bit of percussiveness. Yeah. All right, we got to wrap this up. So there's a lot more that we can talk about here.
We psyched everybody out. Yeah. It was like, all right, we're done. We're gonna be doing. Hang on.
Hang on a minute. Yeah, there's a lot more to talk about with this, but it's
there is though. There is. We do. We have to do it. We're going to be doing these regularly every other Thursday. It's looking like right now. So just come back, and we'll go through more of these. Don't worry. There'll be plenty more. I know it's late, Clint. You're killing the game. It's very late where Clint is. And we've been at this now for some time. So I know how these go when you're presenting for hours on end in front of hot cameras and lights.
And heaters. And,
totally. So, Yeah, you all are the best. Big shouts to the whole chat. Yeah, we were getting we were gonna leave and then we came back. Thanks everybody for hanging in there. I hope you all learned something. Clint, you were amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your wonderful insights.
Thank you for your help on this one. This was I couldn't have done this track without you, and there's a lot of insights here that, like I said, this was a learning experience for me, and the master bus on this one is really fun too. We'll dive into that next time, probably.
Yeah, we gotta get into the mastering.
Maybe Sunday, if anybody wants to show up Sunday.
Let me Clint, can you hit him in the chat with a link to if you want to buy the approach. This is not a sales thing.
Yep.
But if you're interested in seeing more, you should definitely. Clint's gonna drop a link in the chat and hit that link in case you want to check it out. Otherwise, you don't have to buy the approach. Just be with us next Thursday. Come and hang out with Clint and me. I and Clint. Come hang out with I and Clint next Thursday. Joe's Plumbing Gang. And we'll be showing you some more stuff from Clint or myself. And yeah, hit us with your questions. Come show up, hang out, and chill. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to catch you next time.
Peace.
Peace.